You might have just started soccer for the very first time, whether it be enhanced or original, or you might have been playing it for at least 20 years. But one question that might have stood in your mind: what exactly was that truck that was carrying us at the beginning of the game? What is a death truck? And why does it matter? To be fully and totally transparent on the matter, I am using two different wikipedias, okay? It's not just one different source, because if you take a look here, there isn't much going on. Now, if we take a look at, let's see. Oh, I also discovered Zone Chronicles, but it didn't have anything for death trucks. However, let's take a look here. It looks like there's a lot more here compared to the English wiki. So sometimes, and this isn't the only time I've done this, I will go from uh one to the other, and I don't know. Maybe it's just because of who's running the English wiki. Maybe I'm just not entirely sure. But anyway, we'll compare and contrast and see what comes out of this, because we also have a long little lore dump from Regash as well. Death trucks refer to the ZIL-130s used by the sea consciousness to transport their newly brainwashed subjects back into the zone. Most of those poor souls don't survive, hence the name. At the beginning of the game, Mark I was being sent away in one of these trucks. The trip is cut short when the truck is struck by lightning, making the truck explode and crash. Red later found Mark I alive and Ron Vasidorovich. See, I didn't know he actually had a name. I thought, because different mods have given him different names. I think one was at least Astrologer, one was Savior. But it's really amazing that he actually has a name, and he's also been in quite a few mods too. If you've ever played Lost Alpha, he's the very first person you talk to. Who drives his vehicles is unknown. In the intro video of SOC, the driver appears to be a former duty stalker. He's wearing a PSZ-9D duty suit, as evidenced by the 4 red chest panels and the bulletproof vest and somewhat dark color of the suit. This leads some to suspect that the newly inducted subjects drive these trucks, explaining why these stalkers have not yet been given the monolith colors, or it's to fool unaware people. Savior is inspecting the scattered corpses. See Savior, but it's red. See the inconsistency. 2 bodies from the mercenaries and freedom, respectively, can be seen. It is thought that the player can find a death truck at Cordon. This particular vehicle is located a little south of the abandoned military outpost, which connects Cordon and the garbage level. Yeah, if you're going up from the bridge, you will see it on your right. The vehicle is tipped over and surrounded by gravitational anomalies, along with high levels of radiation. Dead Molluth and other faction soldiers are lying around the perimeter. This could be a giveaway that it's a death truck. It could be the same truck Stalker was rescued from, since his rescuer went to Sidorovich on foot. However, this also brings the question of how the truck got there, as it would had to have gone through the military checkpoint or come from Darkscape. Let's take a look here. The name of the truck's delivering agents see consciousness through the territory of the zone. They are part of the story in Stalker Oblivion Lost and Shadow of Chornobyl. Legendary Prypiat or corpse trucks, which are the objects of superstitions of stalkers. They come from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant with a body filled with people, often not reaching the place of arrival due to the manifestations of the zone. In 2012, one of the carriages of death during a thunderstorm hit lightning. The vehicle exploded and flew out of the road. In the morning, the same or the next day, an unknown stalker ran to the scene and found the survivor. With a tattoo, stalker among the wrecks and corpses, hoping to get some money, he took him to Sidorovich. Well, brother, he asked, this dark matter, found you in the death truck. There are such corpses or what? From time to time, from the center of the zone they appear. The bodies are loaded where they go, no one really knows. So one truck crashed and you were found nearby. In this case, is the most surprising fact. Broken corpses were found before, but alive nearby, never. I'm sorry, I can't help anymore. You'll have to figure it out on your own. So it's a little hard to put together with everything, but considering we should know the game at this point, we can piece together the machine translation and keep going from there. This is the transport we deliver our agents to different parts of the zone. Agents are being implemented on Wednesday by stalkers and perform tasks for which they are programmed, without even knowing it. Unfortunately, more than half of the agents die during transportation, as the zone is very unstable. And according to this, we actually get more factions: military, freedom, a mercenary, a loner, and of course, marked one. Most likely, according to the developers, this is the same truck in which Mission A was found, since the player is in some sense directed there. The issuance of the hidden things cache located just next to the car. But in the introductory video, the train is not like Cordon. This is due to the fact it was created before the approval of the final crash site. According to the concept art, death trucks go at high speed without a driver. When Mission A arrives at Agroprom, rumors about new zombies from the... here we go. Death truck. One of the endings of the game could be that Mission A was again taken by a truck, but closer to the checkpoint in Gordon. Described in the short story, the story short on Doc. Trucks of death took away from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant only the corpses of stalkers who did not survive the influence of monolith, described in the passage of the first 3 levels. We definitely know this. We aren't allowed to go into camp because we're found in the death truck. If you've played any mods, I think at least Lost Alpha does this. They don't let you until you do a task. Why can't I go to camp? You have to be a complete idiot to put a man from a death truck into camp. First, prove that you can be trusted. What is a truck of death? I don't remember anything. I don't know much, but it's something very, very bad. In general, I will not talk about this topic, especially with you. You can call it superstition, so it's better to get off. What do you know about death trucks? I don't know, and I don't want to know. I'm sorry, I know you're from there. But too much of this was some kind of mysticism. And if you don't want to work in the zone, you'll be superstitious. Dead in the back, dead behind the wheel. Who are they? From where? I hope it's from the wrong place. The first sketches of the death truck was created at the end of 2003. Then the comic was drawn for the future introductory video. The first time the truck of death is mentioned in the document of scenarios_elements1.xls. It says that one of the game events was the appearance of a truck in which a zombified pursuing the player and... See, but I don't get this part. Player and Strelick. Then mention the very name Truck of Death regarding zombified stalkers. Mentioned several times in the game's screensaver scenario. Literature plot refers to the appearance of rumors about the new zombified as well as one of the variants of the endings, in which the player is again taken out by a death truck to the Gordon checkpoint. This just rehashes what we were already told. Also indicated that the trucks go to Dark Valley. And a little bit of trivia, apparently the ZIL 130 has an atypical radiator grille, but in the game, it's normal. Very interesting. Now let's take a real deep dive here. One of the biggest mysteries of the zone are their so-called death trucks, vehicles loaded with bodies that supposedly come from the very center of the zone. Their presence is one of the subplots of Shadow of Chornobyl, and while the player might eventually find out what they really are, some questions will still remain unanswered. This post aims to summarize all known facts about the death trucks, including the evolution of their concept during the game's development, which can clarify some confusing things. So, we all know the basics, right? The sea consciousness is sending out the death trucks to try and infiltrate stalkers' networks, and they're sent to all different various places. There is a bit of conjecture. I can't remember if all of them were just sent to kill Strelick, or if they all have their own missions to just infiltrate stalkers and, fuck with them like the monolith, but you know what, I guess we'll see. The opening cutscene of Shadow of Chornobyl is obviously crucial to the topic, so let's start with it. In it, we see a ZIL 130 rushing through the zone at night during a storm. Then the camera shows its interior, and here the first mystery appears. The driver, wearing a duty suit. Then the camera shows a cargo area where we see a stalker who appears to have been dead for a long time already. And several bodies. Considering what we will learn later in the game, the presence of the corpse is another mystery. Then some kind of electrical discharge hits the truck, and with such force it is momentarily lifted off the road, catches fire, and tumbles to the side of the road. Here is another mystery. What even was this discharge, and what caused it? The next shot is during the day. We see a stalker running along the same road the truck was traveling on before, who then approaches the wreck and checks the bodies. We can see a mercenary and a soldier, and of course also the game's protagonist, whose condition surprises the stalker. The stalker then takes the sole survivor to Sidorovich, and here it's worth paying attention to the dialogue. The traitor is neither surprised nor overly interested in the fact that the stalker brought a body from the death truck, and only the fact that this is a live one arouses his immediate interest. There are a few unresolved questions for now, apart from the above mentioned, also those of where the truck headed and where exactly it crashed. The player can learn more in the game itself through dialogues, so let's move on. There are only 2 dialogues regarding death trucks in the game. The player can ask Sidorovich about what happened to him, to which the traitor will respond. What kind of question is that? You see, that's some shady business. They found you in a death truck. That's a kind of corpse carrier, right? These trucks come in from the center of the zone once in a while loaded with bodies. No one really knows where they're headed, so one of them crashed into something and you were found nearby. This is the most amazing thing of all. We found broken down corpse carriers before, but no one ever came out of them alive. I'm sorry, bro, that's all I can help you with. The rest you'll have to figure out yourself. The fact that death trucks have been found before can be linked to the implication presented in the cutscene, namely the bodies from them were brought to Sidorovich more than once already. The traitor wanted to find out what was going on in the center of the zone and how to get there, and bodies from the trucks that supposedly came from that place could contain some clues on this subject. That's most likely why he had the passengers brought to him. The second more important dialogue, which should seemingly answer all the mysteries, is the one with the sea consciousness representative, which the player has the opportunity to have near the end of the game. When asked about death trucks, he answers as follows. The transports were used to send our marked agents into the zone. They infiltrate the Stalker community and carry out our orders without realizing it. Unfortunately, more than half of them die during transportation. The zone is very unstable. You are one of our agents sent to kill Strelick, and we're now trying to figure out how we made that mistake. From the representative, we also learned that marked agents are programmed to perform specific tasks, and this can be considered an answer to the mystery regarding the driver. We can simply assume that it was a brainwashed studier who was tasked with driving the truck. However, to explain the remaining mysteries, we need to trace the history of the death truck concept. For now, I'll skip that last crucial aspect from the game itself, i.e., the death truck found in the northern part of Cordon. There are other ambiguities about it, so I'll get to it later, so as to not cause confusion. The concept of death trucks appeared in 2003, when the game was still Stalker Oblivion Lost. An original description of the game's intro was created back then, so I'll only include the most important excerpt here. Night. Only somewhere on the horizon a bluish glow flickers, and occasionally the sky is pierced by electric discharges. Slowly and almost silently, slightly bouncing on the potholes, a truck descends from the hillock, with its headlights and engine turned off. When it rolls closer, then with the next flash, it is visible that its cabin is empty, and the back is crammed with stacks of sealed coffins. Suddenly, a barely flickering glow blows up. The sky splits, and the bubbling clusters of the condensed space begin a crazy dance. An emission begins. Electric discharges strike more and more often. One hits the truck directly. The truck jumps, penetrated with electric discharges. The gasoline flares up, and the truck uncontrollably begins to fall apart. Burning shreds and coffins scatter in different directions. Some of the coffins break open, the dead fall out. Each has one sleeve of a suit rolled up, and a tattoo is visible on the arm. But in the twitchy light of the restless flame, it is impossible to make out what's written there. Overall, the description is similar to what we see in the game itself, but there are noticeable differences in the concept. First of all, the truck was supposed to somehow travel without a driver, which is quite bizarre. Second thing is the fact that the truck was carrying actual corpses that were already in coffins. These two facts are quite strange. The first one was not addressed or explained in any way in the document, and the second one suggests that the death trucks were originally intended to actually transport corpses. So between Oblivion Lost and Shadow of Chornobyl, 5 years later at least, well, there's already quite a bit of difference here, as you can see, because we don't see coffins. We do see corpses. We do see that. The truck, the engine is on. We do hear it. And there is somebody actually driving the truck, a duty, or somebody's in the cabin, right? So already there's quite a few differences. The third fact that needs to be noted is the fact that the truck crashed as a result of discharges generated during an emission, even though in the cutscene it seems like it's just a normal storm. And here something needs to be clarified. The cutscenes from Shadow of Chornobyl were outsourced by GSC to an Australian animation studio, Plastic Wax. It's not exactly known how their collaboration looked like, but it's possible that Plastic Wax relied on more or less detailed scene descriptions provided by GSC but had some creative freedom. They started working on the intro cutscene sometime in 2004, and the initial version of it ending with the crash, not containing the second half yet, was most likely finished in early 2005. It can be found in files of pre-release builds from that year. Here's what it looked like. So just from this video, I took a little glance at it. The audio is definitely different. The main bits are here though. So if we take a look, this little bit is here. There's a crack in the windshield, a bullet hole, which is different. Little bits that are different. Okay. The back bit here looks a little bit different. The bed looks different. There is no corpse here, obviously, but if we look, it still does the thing. Like it still centers on this, like they're supposed to be, but they hadn't done that part yet. You know what I mean? But it's all there in place, and the truck still goes on. So this part hasn't changed. Neither is this, and neither is the wreck. But in other words, I mean, it's basically there, 70% there, 80% there. There are some differences compared to the final version. The ZIL logo is visible on the hood of the truck. The camera flies into the cabin through a bullet hole in the window, later removed. And the dead stalker's body is missing, but the camera shots where he was supposed to be in the foreground are present. Now, the concept of emissions also went through some changes, and it wasn't until 2004 that the devs decided it should make the sky turn red, and it's quite possible that Plastic Wax wasn't informed. This means that the storm seen in the cutscene isn't an ordinary storm, but in a mission as imagined by the animation creators, who probably didn't receive any guidelines and relied on a basic description. And this explains the mystery of what exactly caused the truck to crash. It was an electrical discharge generated by the emission, at least an assumption. A concept sketch of this cutscene was created in 2003, which I also included in the above mentioned post. Here's a gallery with all the images. As in the description, the truck has no driver and is carrying sealed coffins. It's also a different model vehicle, GAZ 3308. The license plate says Cruise 200, Cargo 200, which is a Russian military code name for the transportation of bodies of dead soldiers. Returning to design documents, the original intro description was included in a document describing the early outline of the plot. It doesn't contain any explanation regarding the presence of death trucks, but it mentions an interesting concept. Once the player would reach Agroprom, he would learn about rumors regarding new death trucks that had begun to be found, carrying survivors said to be half zombified and programmed to kill the protagonist. So the little bits we read earlier, that's starting to come together now. This is briefly considered as an actual gameplay element. The player would come across zombified killers who would be looking for him, which is also mentioned in other documents from that year. I don't know if this refers to as like the actual killer faction. Regardless, let's move on. Moving deeper into the zone, we follow the path that Strelick took. We stumble upon traces of his activities, gradually finding out what interested him, where he went, what he asked about. Lastly, we learn about the Black Monolith, and in our footsteps follow zombies from death trucks akin to us. That's crazy, man. This is back when Toad was still a thing. Wow, look at that. Earlier documents indicate that it was considered to be just a single event. Moving on to design documents from 2004, the death truck concept has evolved. The storyline description from this year included a concept of the Black Monolith, which was supposed to be a self-formed energy source resulting from the sea consciousness experiment, originating from some substance under the sarcophagus. Discharges of its energy would cause hallucinations and zombification, and it would be used by the sea consciousness as a protective measure. The Black Monolith was supposed to affect different people in different ways. One possible outcome of its influence was death, and that was what the trucks were used for. The monolith affects people differently. Some die. They are taken away from the center of the zone in death trucks. Others completely lose their memory. For people who have undergone the zombification process only partially, and who are easily controlled, special squads of zombie defenders are formed. The most resilient ones are sent to eliminate unwanted people, both in the zone and beyond. The zombification procedure has the codename STALKER. The protagonist would have fallen under the monolith's influence prior to the events of the game, but due to a mistake he was treated as if he had fallen into every category at once. He was programmed to perform a task, which happened to be eliminating himself, and at the same time he was presumed dead, so he was put in a death truck. The concept of death trucks being used to transport those who died during recruitment was even close to being included in the game, but more on that later. Another document from 2004 includes an idea that the player would initially be treated with distrust by stalkers in the village to the core due to being a survivor from the death truck. And it's also mentioned that the crash truck itself would be located in the garbage area. More on that later as well, because this applies to the concept of builds. In 2005, the concept changed again, and death trucks were to have a new purpose, closer to what is known from the actual game. According to design documents, they were supposed to transport agents of the Stalker program to the Dark Valley, from where they were dispersed and perform their programmed tasks, even outside of the zone. Corpses near death trucks in the Dark Valley. The remaining PDAs contain a bunch of orders to eliminate certain people and perform certain incomprehensible tasks in the outside world. This concept is described in greater detail in later documents from that year. The valley is the place where the most persistent of the zombified stalkers are taken from the monolith. The death trucks go here. Here is the easiest exit from the zone to the outside world, and it is here that the sea consciousness sends its assassins and executors to work in the outside world. Lots of trucks and corpses. In the PDA, there are various tasks. In Kiev, kill Yushchenko, Komarov, Sidorov, etc. It's worth mentioning that a base in the Monolith faction was also originally supposed to be located in the Dark Valley, which can be seen in builds from 2005. Death trucks were never implemented there, though. In the documents, it's also mentioned that Sidorovich would task the player with finding the remains of the truck that was carrying him, and that the sea consciousness representative would explain what the death trucks were at the end of the game. This tracks because, well, it happens. The former idea is also described in another document. The carrier would contact the player once he reached garbage. I'd like to know, of course, what happened to you before the death truck. Don't you remember by any chance? By the way, don't you want to look at the truck that's yours? It's lying in the garbage area. I'll send you the coordinates just in case. And that's it for the most important information from the documents. Now let's move on to pre-release builds and some cut content from the game itself. I've already mentioned the cutscene in its development. It appeared in 2005. And in one of the builds from that year, a supposed death truck wreck also appears for the first and only time. In build 2205, there's a ZIL 130 on the side of the road in the southern part of garbage. Note that this is an old version of the location, significantly different from the one known from the final version. It may seem unfounded to assume that this vehicle is meant to represent a death truck, but this theory is based on the fact that on the garbage location scheme from 2005, the area on the edge of where this particular ZIL is located is indicated as the location of the death truck wreck, which we can see here. Of course, this is not a concrete confirmation, and this wreck may just in fact be a random wreck, but who knows? Garbage was later completely reworked, and subsequent builds include the version known from the actual game, but here comes another interesting fact. In build 2232, an unused sound file appeared in the files. It's a draft version of Sidorovich's message about the death truck that the player was supposed to hear after entering the garbage, which was mentioned in the design documents. It was never implemented or removed from the files that can also be found in the final version of the game. As I mentioned, in 2004, it was planned that stalkers from the rookie camp would be distrustful of the protagonist, which we know, and this was also introduced in the gameplay. In builds from 2005 and 6, one of the stalkers will tell the player that he cannot enter, and only after Mark I proves himself by working for Sidorovich, i.e. performing a task of bringing an artifact, which was later cut, will he be granted access. So, in a few different mods, build mods, OLR, I think, Lost Alpha, some of them for sure, you do definitely do this, but Lost Alpha gives you the cave as well, the minor cave, which is kind of a pain in the ass for the very first time. And if you've just been thrown into it, it's also very nerve-wracking too. If the player leaves Sidorovich's bunker using a glitch or a mod before talking to him and accepting the first task, the following conversation will be possible with stalkers in the village. Wait, Marked One, no one at the camp is going to talk to you right now. Why? What kind of idiot would chat with a former passenger of the death truck? First, you gotta prove you're okay to deal with. What death truck? What are you talking about? Hell only knows what it really is, but whatever it is, it's bad. It's about as bad as it gets. Why am I talking to you about this anyway? Maybe I'm just superstitious, but you, Marked One, should really take a hike before something happens to you. Moreover, the game files also contain some unused wolf dialogues. It was planned for the player to be able to ask him a few questions about the zone, but it was cut. One of these questions concerned death trucks. And, well, we already read the majority of this anyway. There is also the matter of dialogue with the Sea Consciousness representative. The earliest version of it can be found in build 2571 from 2006, but the dialogue scene does not appear in the build itself. In a subsequent build 2588, the conversation can already be held, and here's what the original answer to the question about what the death trucks was. Almost all activities involve waste production, especially if it involves a new uncharted path. Fortunately, at least half of the stalkers die during recruitment, apparently some kind of natural selection. The rejected specimens are taken away. We consider that you cannot stand the recruitment process, which is why you were considered selected for rejection. Now we are trying to figure out where our mistake lay. And for comparison, here's the earlier version. In any production, there is waste. About half of stalkers die during recruitment. We perceive it as natural selection. Those who could not withstand are taken away. Someone thought you could not withstand recruitment, and you were assigned to one of the trucks. But you turned out to be stronger. So as I mentioned, the idea from 2004 documents, according to which death trucks were used to transport the corpses of people for whom the programming or recruitment process ended in death, was supposed to appear in the game. And the idea that they are transporting undercover agents, although it appeared in 2005 documents, was introduced to the game itself very late, at the end of 2006. And this is why an actual corpse is visible in the opening cutscene. At the developmental stage during which the cutscene was created, it was assumed that death trucks are literal corpse carriers. And the fact that Mark I is the only known case of a living passenger is not because most of them die due to the instability of the zone, but because all people who were loaded onto them are already dead, and the protagonist ended up in one by accident. I suspect that this concept was ultimately abandoned because it simply makes little sense. It shouldn't be difficult to hide or destroy bodies in the zone. The Sea Consciousness would have no reason to organize their transported trucks to the outskirts of it, which would surely arouse suspicions and speculations among stalkers. Yeah, it definitely would, but with the cutscene being the way it is in the corpse, this definitely makes a lot more sense now. And that's it for the development history. The final concept of death trucks, known from the game itself, contains traces of several older ideas at once, hence its inconsistency. And the presence of a death truck at the cordon only deepens the confusion. So let's move on to it now. At the cordon, by the road south of the northern outpost, there is an overturned ZIL 130. We're all definitely familiar with this one. That apparently collided with a gravitational anomaly. There are several corpses lying around it, hence the reasonable assumption that it is a death truck. And although it's not directly stated, it's commonly assumed that it is the one that was transporting Marked One, even though it obviously doesn't fit, which we talked about before. The matter is complicated by the fact that the bodies lying next to it belong to two soldiers and very strangely to four monolithians. And here, one important thing must be noted. This truck was placed in the cordon very late in the development. The location itself has undergone many changes during it. None of its versions included in builds, even those from 2006, which were very close to the final version of the game, contain this overturned ZIL. So shortly before the game's release, someone from the dev team responsible for filling out the location apparently decided to add this truck, likely in order to create the appearance of a connection between the in-game world and the opening cutscene. Even though this connection makes little sense, it's hard to come up with an explanation of how that truck could have gotten there and bypassed the barrier which we talked about, or why there are monolith bodies around it. Of course, various theories will be made, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the fact is, there's no point in trying to attach a lore explanation to these issues. The devs themselves didn't think about it, and the decorative models of corpses were most likely chosen without much thought as to whether or not they fit into the environment. There is a backpack in the back of the truck that serves as a stash named Hidden Things, which we went over, with some medical supplies inside. The coordinates for it are obtained by helping Fox, or alternatively from soldiers in the Agrabah underground. Its description is as follows. Threw my backpack off not far from the post. Should pick it up as soon as possible before the commander transfers us to a new location. This description seems quite strange. There is no mention of the truck or the bodies. It would be more fitting if the backpack was in the bushes or something like that. And here's an interesting fact. The description wasn't always like this. An early version from late 2006 was as follows. I dropped my backpack near the corpses from the overturned truck. I need to get it quickly before the commander transfers us to another location. So this one definitely makes a little bit more sense than this one. This one, uh, the earlier one doesn't. I mean, it does talk about the corpses in the truck, which is great. That fits, that tracks. But this one doesn't. This is more vague. I don't know why they did that. This can be found out by analyzing the history of file edits, which became possible after certain materials were leaked. In any case, as can be seen, the stash description was originally supposed to mention the truck, but for some reason it was later edited. Who knows, maybe the devs briefly considered removing the truck from the location, but in the end it stayed, and the description change was forgotten. And there we have it. Now that the facts have been established, some assumptions and theories can be made. Death trucks are only mentioned in Shadow of Chornobyl. There are no mention of them in Clear Sky. Based on that, it can be assumed that they only started to be seen after the events of the prequel. It's possible that the Sea Consciousness began the program of brainwashing agents to fulfill specific tasks only in late 2011, or at least only then on such a scale that they could be sent off into the zone in larger numbers at once. The events of Clear Sky began in September 2011. It's unknown how long they lasted from a lore perspective, but it was most likely a matter of a few weeks at most. Shadow of Chornobyl begins in May 2012, so more than half a year passed between the two games. It's quite surprising that Starlink was sent in a truck only after such a long time, and it leaves some questions about how long the programming process took and how its participants were kept alive. It's possible, however, that Starlink was a special case, and in the meantime other agents had already been sent multiple times. This must have been the case because as Sidorovitz mentions in the SOC, death trucks had been found before. If we assume that they appeared only at the end of 2011, and the last one was sent in spring of 2012, it means the whole operation lasted only a few months. Another matter is how the death trucks moved around the zone. When their concept was created and developed, it was planned that the player would have the ability to use cars, which we do see in build mods. The locations were larger and had more open roads, so Darkscape, you know, that little chase sequence if you played Lost Alpha. So back then, the fact that trucks could get from the center of the zone all the way to the south wasn't that surprising. But in the final version of the game, where roads are often blocked and there doesn't seem to be a straight route from the CNPP to the south, it seems almost impossible. Therefore, it can be theorized that the trucks were traveling through some unexplored paths, and that they perhaps used secret underground tunnels that could potentially be located in many places, and about which the Sea Consciousness would know about. It's also worth to take a closer look at the truck that was carrying Marked One and consider whether it could have crashed. As established, it was originally supposed to go through the garbage, then it was sort of moved to the cordon, but in the end it's not really confirmed, and thus we could come up with other theories. It would make sense if the truck moved from the north along some unknown paths to the Dark Valley, and then traveled along the long route between it and the cordon, i.e., Darkscape. This would also make it possible for the stalker who saved the protagonist to carry him from there to Sidorovitch, as the distance wouldn't be that big. Another issue is the cause of its crash. Again, as established, it was supposed to be a discharge caused by the emission, but since emissions known from the series look different, We can approach this strictly from a lore perspective and theorize it was something else. Normal lighting does not behave in such a destructive way, so we can assume there was something of an anomalous nature. Maybe the zone itself doesn't like vehicles. It's also worth noting here that the idea that is somewhat implied in the games. Actually, I'm sorry, that was funny because Call of Prypiat definitely agrees with that one for sure. And confirmed in the prequel's design documents, namely that the sea consciousness had an influence on the occurrence of emissions, appeared very late during the development. So the fact that a death truck was sent to the zone shortly before a blow-up began shouldn't be considered a logical error. At the same time, it's entirely possible that the sea consciousness wasn't heavily involved in micromanaging the entire Stalker operation, which would explain how the Strelic mistake could have occurred or why so many agents die. The whole process from capturing stalkers through brainwashing and programming them, loading them onto trucks and sending them to the zone, could be somehow automated and managed by half-zombified subordinates who can make some mistakes. This could even explain why, in addition to the agents, there were also some dead stalkers in the trucks. Finally, we could also consider the option that the Koran death truck wasn't a death truck at all, but something like a military transport of captured Monolithians, which due to their behavior went wrong and ended with the vehicle driving into an anomaly. But as I mentioned, creating theories about the presence of monolith corpses is an over-analysis of something that the devs themselves did not think about. However, it seems that those devs who worked on the cancelled sequel from 2011 possibly did want to explain it. Let's move on to the last topic. Surprisingly, in design documents of the old sequel, there is a mention of death trucks. It's included in a document that has a list of various ideas considered by the devs during the development, more precisely in the unsorted category, among other concepts for which they had no specific plans. There are no details about it. It could have just been a brief thought of one of the devs, and since it was never considered that Monolithians are transported in death trucks before, it's possible that this idea was based solely on the Koran death truck from SFC. Anyway, that's about it. The concept of corpse carriers has changed over the years, and traces of these changes can be seen in the game. But after learning about the details, things should probably become clear. So some of the people in the comments have some theories in how the death trucks reach the southern part of the zone. First is, there's supposedly some driving level in old build maps, i.e. Darkscape and Lost Alphas, Countryside, Forest, and Lost Road. Since Countryside is connected to radar, there's nothing stopping Seacon in using this route. The route can be radar to Countryside to Old Road, bypassing army warehouses, to Forest, Dark Valley, Darkscape. Second is a combination teleport tech, although an unstable version in mark space anomalies, like shown in CS and SOC, where Seacon could teleport Monolith and CNPP, where they transfer the whole truck outside of CNPP and drive through charted space anomalies. Either they get stuck in a spatial bubble and get drop off dead in some random location, or simply teleport to who knows where. Interesting, very interesting. The Shadow of Chornobyl cutscene 1 could have been destroyed by some sort of an electric anomaly, so we know airborne anomalies are a thing. Someone can behave partly like a lightning or some kind of focused electric beam isn't far-fetched. I feel like this really sums it up, though, but I was doing a little bit more digging, and it really is crazy to see almost 20 years ago that people were still debating about this very topic. It is crazy, man. And they seem to think that Strelick was the one driving the truck. I don't know why. What proof is there that he was the driver? But yeah, I think we're about done with this topic. I don't think there's any more we can really uh, say about this, because I feel like that those three things really kind of put it to bed, so to speak. Unless we find out something new in Soccer 2, of course.